The last few days, the Biden administration announced that the Department of Homeland Security now has a disinformation board. This isn't about the truth. This isn't about protecting families. This is about your federal government deciding what truth is and what speech is acceptable. Anybody that read George Orwell's 1984 remembers the thought police. In the thought police, they would tell everybody exactly how they could think and what they could say. If you remember this, we've been dealing with this with social media, where they decided that, taking an example with Hunter Biden's laptop, what was true and what was not true. And Republican senators were conspiracy theorists because that's what they decided. Now we know that all the stories about Biden's laptop, it was his Hunter Biden's laptop. So every American should be concerned about the Biden administration now creating a disinformation board that is going to be able to tell Americans what the truth is, just like PolitiFact. They'll go off to the left. They'll tell Americans exactly what the truth is and what you can talk about.
With the 6 seconds bite of what the President of the United States said about the MAGA crowd.
This MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history.
So do they think the American people, do they think we don't get this? They put up this board of governors for misinformation and disinformation. The president labels the greatest threat, the political threat, is this MAGA crowd. And what do they think is going to happen? That they're not going to use the board of governors for misinformation and disinformation to go after conservatives? Guess again, Harry.
I think you're precisely. Today, President Biden has become the great divider. He's railing against what he calls the MAGA crowd. That would be the Make America Great Again crowd. To the present, making America great is an extremist agenda. It's definitely not a unifying message, is it? You know, I just can't resist making a comparison with what candidate Clinton said about Republicans in 2016. Roll tape.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
Well, right after that speech, Hillary reportedly said, "I think I just stepped in it."
The problem you have is you're not even willing to admit, we can't even have an agreement on what the FBI said was disinformation. How do you propose that you're going to have an office of disinformation governance if you see the problem in even determining what is disinformation?
Well, Senator, because our work is not focused on disinformation writ large. Where we, the Department of Homeland Security, become involved is when there's a connectivity between disinformation and threats to the security of the homeland.
But when you sort of compare and contrast the damage and the consequences, you often forget about all of the summer of love. Here we had 19 plus people dead. Not that many people died on Insurrection Day. Arrested, 14,000 plus arrested all across the country. Property damage, $550 million in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Alone, $1 to $2 billion in insured damages throughout the rest of the United States. May 26 to June 8, 2020. Was that amount of damage the same, equivalent to what we saw on Insurrection Day on January 6th, the day that liberty almost left us? I don't think so. I think that what we see here are political opportunists selecting and choosing the extremist groups to proffer forward a narrative that supports their agenda, and it's offensive when both sides do it.
Tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions. You will pay the price. You won't know what hit you. This is exactly the campaign that's now going to be run from now until this opinion is announced. So there's
overturn Roe, including Justice Alito, who was an aggressive questioner.
Can it be said that the right to abortion is deeply rooted in the history and traditions of the American people?
But the draft opinion says because abortion involves taking the life of a fetus, it's in a class by itself. Striking down Roe, Alito writes, would not undercut other constitutional protections, such as for interracial and same-sex marriage. After at first declining comment, the Supreme Court confirmed 15 hours after the draft was published that it was authentic. Chief Justice John Roberts launched an immediate investigation of who leaked it. He called the leak a singular and egregious breach of trust and said if it was intended to undermine the integrity of the court's operations, it will not succeed. The work of the court, he said, will not be affected in any way. But the court is now in turmoil with suspicion that one of the court's law clerks might have been the leaker.
This has never happened in American history, and the court may never be the same when it comes to the trust between the justices and all of their law clerks, because it has only been about trust.
The case at issue involves the fate of a Mississippi law passed in 2018 but so far blocked by a lawsuit that would ban abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Lower court said it would violate the Supreme Court's abortion precedents, beginning with Roe in 1973, that say states cannot ban abortion before the age of fetal viability. That's around 23 weeks into the pregnancy. A decision in the case was expected by late June.
All right. Well, the University of Pennsylvania that we know of has gotten at least $67 million from Chinese sources, anonymous sources. The University of Pennsylvania refused to turn over information to the Justice Department in the last year of the Trump presidency. One of the major jobs of Congress should be to subpoena the University of Pennsylvania's records. They created the Penn Biden Center for Public Policy. I don't know how many administration staff were being paid from that center, but they were being paid with Chinese money. And you have anonymous Chinese donors, the largest of which was $14.5 million. So you take everything that Hunter Biden ever did, and then you look at what Joe Biden was doing. The story here is not Hunter Biden. The story here is the head of the family, just like a mafia family, the head of the family, who, by the way, if you go back and pull up what he said in various campaign events, I knew nothing. I never discussed my son's business. Well, we now know he wrote an $800,000 check for his son's legal expenses in business. This wasn't criminal. This was writing to, including Chinese businesses. He wants us to believe he wrote an $800,000 check and didn't discuss his son's business. He wants us to believe they flew for 17 hours to China and they didn't discuss his son's business. The truth is Joe Biden is a liar. This is a corrupt family occupying the White House, and we need to get to the bottom of it. And I believe the University of Pennsylvania's $67 million from China is a lot bigger scandal than Hunter Biden's laptop. As big a scandal, frankly, as the laptop is.
Yeah. Real quick.
Misinformation, and that is a vague term. I want you to think about this, folks. The Department of Homeland Security, they have agents. They are going to do what? If they think your information you're giving out is misinformation or disinformation, whatever that means, that they can then what? Arrest you? Or they're going to stop it? Have you indicted for this misinformation or disinformation? Have agents visit you for this misinformation or disinformation? So who would object? James Madison to start. The rest of the founders as well. The idea, and I tell you what, I think a majority of the Supreme Court, if they thought about it, can you imagine that we are now living in a period of time in our history where a governance board has been set up by, of all agencies, the Department of Homeland Security, to silence voices that they believe to be, not a court, that they believe to be misinformation or disinformation. You know the way you handle speech you disagree with? More speech. But that apparently is not the view of the United States Department of Homeland Security and the Biden administration. So let me say it again. The greatest potential threat to the freedom of speech is a misinformation, disinformation governance board by the federal government through the Department of Homeland Security. To me, the potentially greatest threat to freedom of speech in the United States today is a government agency, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, having a governance board on misinformation and disinformation so that they can stop disinformation and misinformation. They're not saying illegal speech. They're not saying speech that's likely to cause harm. They're saying information you disagree with, that the government disagrees with, misinformation.
This legislation is designed to ensure that Democrats never lose another election. This legislation would register millions of illegal aliens to vote. It is intended to do that. It is intended to do that because Democrats have made the decision that millions of illegal aliens voting are likely to vote for Democrats. This would register vast numbers of criminals and felons to vote, because Democrats have made the decisions that criminals and felons are likely to vote for Democrats. This legislation strikes down virtually every voter integrity law adopted at the state level. Voter ID laws. Over 70% of Americans support voter ID laws. By the way, over 60% of African Americans in this country support voter ID laws. 29 states have voter ID laws on the books. What does this legislation do? Strikes them all down. Says it's illegal for any state to have a voter ID law. Ballot harvesting, 31 states prohibit ballot harvesting. Why? Because it is a corrupt practice where paid operatives handle the ballots of someone else, and it has repeatedly led to instances of stealing votes. What does this bill do? It strikes down all 31 states' restrictions on ballot harvesting. This bill turns the Federal Election Commission from a bipartisan agency into a partisan agency. Controlled by Democrats. Why? Because Democrats want Chuck Schumer in charge of the Federal Election Commission. The effect of that, I will point out, will be that every Republican senator and every Republican House member will be investigated, will be fined, will be prosecuted by the Federal Election Commission. By the way, if this bill were to pass and miraculously Democrats were to lose power, and this is designed to make it impossible for Democrats to lose power, I ask you for a moment, which Democrat on this committee would want a Federal Election Committee controlled by Senator McConnell? Because I guarantee you, every Democrat would then be investigated and prosecuted, and the Federal Election Commission shouldn't be a partisan weapon designed to win elections. History are on you as well, and let me point out something. It was just a few years ago that Republicans had control of the White House, the Senate, and the House. We didn't do this. We didn't try to change the election rules so that Democrats could never be elected. We didn't engage in the corruption to say, we're going to rig the game. So if the voters decide to throw the bums out, the voters don't get the right to do that because we're going to put our thumb on the scale so that only our party wins. To my knowledge, not a single Republican suggested doing that. This bill doesn't protect voting rights. It steals voting rights from the American people.
Feel free to comment, like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. And thanks for watching.